Very early in our experience of popsipetel kindness we saw that if we were to get anything done at all, we would almost always have to do it secretly. The doctor was so popular and loved by all that as soon as he showed his face at his door in the morning, crowds of admirers, waiting patiently outside, flocked about him and followed him wherever he went. After his fire-making feat, this childlike people expected him, I think, to be continually doing magic. And they were determined not to miss a trick. It was only with great difficulty that we escaped from the crowd the first morning and set out with Long Arrow to explore the island at our leisure. In the interior we found that not only the plants and trees were suffering from the cold, the animal life was in even worse straits. Everywhere, shivering birds were to be seen, their feathers all fluffed out, gathering together for flight to summer lands. And many lay dead upon the ground. Going down to the shore, we watched land crabs in large numbers taking to the sea to find some better home. While away to the southeast we could see many icebergs floating, a sign that we were now not far from the terrible region of the Antarctic. As we were looking out to sea, we noticed our friends the porpoises jumping through the waves. The doctor hailed them and they came inshore. He asked them how far we were from the South Polar continent. About 100 miles, they told him. And then they asked why he wanted to know. Because this floating island we are on, said he, is drifting southward all the time in a current. It's an island that ordinarily belongs somewhere in the tropic zone. Real sultry weather, sunstrokes and all that. If it doesn't stop going southward pretty soon everything on it is going to perish. Well, said the porpoises, then the thing to do is to get it back into a warmer climate, isn't it? Yes, but how? Said the doctor. We can't row it back. No, said they, but whales could push it, if you only got enough of them. What a splendid idea. Whales, the very thing, said the doctor. Do you think you could get me some? Why, certainly, said the porpoises. We passed one herd of them out there, sporting about among the icebergs. We'll ask them to come over. And if they aren't enough, we'll try and hunt up some more. Better have plenty. Thank you, said the doctor. You are very kind. By the way, do you happen to know how this island came to be a floating island? At least half of it, I notice, is made of stone. It is very odd that it floats at all, isn't it? It is unusual, they said. But the explanation is quite simple. It used to be a mountainous part of South America, an overhanging part, sort of. An awkward corner, you might say. Way back in the glacial days. Thousands of years ago, it broke off from the mainland, and by some curious accident the inside of it, which is hollow, got filled with air as it fell into the ocean. You can only see less than half of the island. The bigger half is underwater. And in the middle of it, underneath, is a huge rock air chamber, running right up inside the mountains. And that's what keeps it floating. What a curious phenometer, said Bumpo. It is indeed, said the doctor. I must make a note of that. And out came the everlasting notebook. The porpoises went bounding off towards the icebergs. And not long after, we saw the sea heaving and frothing as a big herd of whales came towards us at full speed. They certainly were enormous creatures, and there must have been a good 200 of them. "Here they are," said the porpoises, poking their heads out of the water. "Good," said the doctor. "Now just explain to them, will you please, that this is a very serious matter for all the living creatures in this land. And ask them if they will be so good as to go down to the far end of the island, put their noses against it and push it back near the coast of southern Brazil." The porpoises evidently succeeded in persuading the whales to do as the doctor asked, for presently we saw them thrashing through the seas, going off towards the south end of the island. Then we lay down upon the beach and waited. After about an hour the doctor got up and threw a stick into the water. For a while this floated motionless, but soon we saw it begin to move gently down the coast. "Ah," said the doctor, "see that? The island is going north at last. Thank goodness." Faster and faster we left the stick behind, and smaller and dimmer grew the icebergs on the skyline. The doctor took out his watch, threw more sticks into the water and made a rapid calculation. "Humph, 14.5 knots an hour, he murmured, "a very nice speed. It should take us about 5 days to get back near Brazil." "Well, that's that, quite a load off my mind. I declare I feel warmer already. Let's go and get something to eat." On our way back to the village the doctor began discussing natural history with Long Arrow, but their most interesting talk, mainly about plants, had hardly begun when an Indian runner came dashing up to us with a message. Long Arrow listened gravely to the breathless, babbled words, then turned to the doctor and said in eagle tongue, "Great white man, an evil thing has befallen the Popsipetels. Our neighbors to the southward, the thievish Bag Jagderags, who for so long have cast envious eyes on our stores of ripe corn, have gone upon the war path, and even now are advancing to attack us." "Evil news indeed," said the doctor. "Yet let us not judge harshly. Perhaps it is that they are desperate for food, having their own crops frost killed before harvest. For are they not even nearer the cold south than you? Make no excuses for any man of the tribe of the Bag Jagderags," said Long Arrow, shaking his head. "They are an idle, shiftless race. They do but see a chance to get corn without the labor of husbandry. If it were not that they are a much bigger tribe and hope to defeat their neighbor by sheer force of numbers, they would not have dared to make open war upon the brave Popsipetels." When we reached the village we found it in a great state of excitement. Everywhere men were seen putting their bows in order, sharpening spears, grinding battle axes and making arrows by the hundred. Women were raising a high fence of bamboo poles all round the village. Scouts and messengers kept coming and going, bringing news of the movements of the enemy, while high up in the trees and hills about the village we could see lookouts watching the mountains to the southward. Long Arrow brought another Indian, short but enormously broad, and introduced him to the doctor as Big Teeth. the chief warrior of the Popsipetels. The doctor volunteered to go and see the enemy and try to argue the matter out peacefully with them instead of fighting. For war, he said, was at best a stupid, wasteful business. But the two shook their heads. Such a plan was hopeless, they said. In the last war, when they had sent a messenger to do peaceful arguing, the enemy had merely hit him with an axe. While the doctor was asking Big Teeth how he meant to defend the village against attack, a cry of alarm was raised by the lookouts. "They're coming! The Bag-Jagderags swarming down the mountains in thousands." "Well," said the doctor, "it's all in the day's work, I suppose. I don't believe in war, but if the village is attacked we must help defend it." And he picked up a club from the ground and tried the heft of it against a stone. "This," he said, "seems like a pretty good tool to me." And he walked to the bamboo fence and took his place among the other waiting fighters. Then we all got hold of some kind of weapon with which to help our friends, the gallant Popsipetels. I borrowed a bow and a quiver full of arrows. Jip was content to rely upon his old, but still strong teeth. She took a bag of rocks and climbed a palm where he could throw them down upon the enemy's heads, and Bumpo marched after the doctor to the fence armed with a young tree in one hand and a door post in the other. When the enemy drew near enough to be seen from where we stood, we all gasped with astonishment. The hillsides were actually covered with them, thousands upon thousands. They made our small army within the village look like a mere handful. "Saints alive," muttered Polynesia, "our little lot will stand no chance against that swarm. This will never do. I'm going off to get some help." Where she was going and what kind of help she meant to get, I had no idea. She just disappeared from my side. But Jip, who had heard her, poked his nose between the bamboo bars of the fence to get a better view of the enemy and said, "Likely enough she's gone after the black parrots. Let's hope she finds them in time. Just look at those ugly ruffians climbing down the rocks. Millions of 'em. This fight's going to keep us all hopping." And Jip was right. Before a quarter of an hour had gone by, our village was completely surrounded by one huge mob of yelling, raging Bag-Jagderags. I now come again to a part in the story of our voyages where things happened so quickly, one upon the other, that looking backwards I see the picture only in a confused kind of way. I know that if it had not been for the terrible three, as they came afterwards to be fondly called in Popsipetel history, Long Arrow, Bumpo and the doctor, the war would have been soon over and the whole island would have belonged to the worthless Bag-Jagderags. But the Englishman, the African and the Indian were a regiment in themselves, and between them they made that village a dangerous place for any man to try to enter. The bamboo fencing which had been hastily set up around the town was not a very strong affair, and right from the start it gave way in one place after another as the enemy thronged and crowded against it. Then the doctor, Long Arrow and Bumpo would hurry to the weak spot. A terrific hand-to-hand fight would take place and the enemy be thrown out. But Almost instantly a cry of alarm would come from some other part of the village wall, and the three would have to rush off and do the same thing all over again. The Popsipetels were themselves no mean fighters, but the strength and weight of those three men of different lands and colors, standing close together, swinging their enormous war clubs, was really a sight for the wonder and admiration of any one. Many weeks later, when I was passing an Indian campfire at night, I heard this song being sung. It has since become one of the traditional folk songs of the Popsipetels. But alas, even the three, mighty though they were, could not last forever against an army which seemed to have no end. In one of the hottest scrimmages, when the enemy had broken a particularly wide hole through the fence, I saw Long Arrow's great figure topple and come down with a spear sticking in his broad chest. For another half-hour Bumpo and the doctor fought on side by side. How their strength held out so long I cannot tell, for never a second were they given to get their breath or rest their arms. The doctor, the quiet, kindly, peaceable, little doctor, well, you wouldn't have known him if you had seen him that day dealing out whacks you could hear a mile off, walloping and swatting in all directions. As for Bumpo, with staring eyeballs and grim-set teeth, he was a veritable demon. None dared come within yards of that wicked, wide, circling door-post. But a stone, skillfully thrown, struck him at last in the center of the forehead, and down went the second of the three. John Dolittle, the last of the Terribles, was left fighting alone. Jip and I rushed to his side and tried to take the places of the fallen ones. But, far too light and too small, we made but a poor exchange. Another length of the fence crashed down, and through the widened gap the Bag-Jagderags poured in on us like a flood. To the canoes, to the sea, shouted the Popsipetels. Fly for your lives. All is over. The war is lost. But the doctor and I never got a chance to fly for our lives. We were swept off our feet and knocked down flat by the sheer weight of the mob. And once down, we were unable to get up again. I thought we would surely be trampled to death. But at that moment, above the din and racket of the battle, we heard the most terrifying noise that ever assaulted human ears. The sound of millions and millions of parrots all screeching with fury together. The army, which in the nick of time Polynesia had brought to our rescue, darkened the whole sky to the westward. I asked her afterwards how many birds there were, and she said she didn't know exactly, but that they certainly numbered somewhere between 60 and 70 millions. In that extraordinarily short space of time she had brought them from the mainland of South America. If you have ever heard a parrot screech with anger, you will know that it makes a truly frightful sound, and if you have ever been bitten by one, you will know that its bite can be a nasty and a painful thing. The black parrots, coal black all over, they were, except for a scarlet beak and a streak of red in wing and tail, on the word of command from Polynesia, set to work upon the Bag-Jagderags, who were now pouring through the village looking for plunder. And the black parrots' method of fighting was peculiar. This is what they did. On the head of each bag Jagdarag 3 or 4 parrots settled, and took a good foothold in his hair with their claws. Then they leant down over the sides of his head and began clipping snips out of his ears, for all the world as though they were punching tickets. That is all they did. They never bit them anywhere else except the ears. But it won the war for us. With howls pitiful to hear, the bag Jagdarags fell over one another in their haste to get out of that accursed village. It was no use their trying to pull the parrots off their heads, because for each head there were always 4 more parrots waiting impatiently to get on. Some of the enemy were lucky, and with only a snip or 2 managed to get outside the fence, where the parrots immediately left them alone. But with most, before the black birds had done with them, the ears presented a very singular appearance, like the edge of a postage stamp. This treatment, very painful at the time, did not however do them any permanent harm beyond the change in looks, and it later got to be the tribal mark of the bag Jagdarags. No really smart young lady of this tribe would be seen walking with a man who did not have scalloped ears, for such was a proof that he had been in the Great War, and that though it is not generally known to scientists is how this people came to be called by the other Indian nations, the ragged-eared bag Jagdarags. As soon as the village was cleared of the enemy, the doctor turned his attention to the wounded. In spite of the length and fierceness of the struggle, there were surprisingly few serious injuries. Poor Long Arrow was the worst off. However, after the doctor had washed his wound and got him to bed, he opened his eyes and said he already felt better. Bumpo was only badly stunned. With this part of the business over, the doctor called to Polynesia to have the black parrots drive the enemy right back into their own country and to wait there, guarding them all night. Polynesia gave the short word of command, and like one bird those millions of parrots opened their red beaks and let out once more their terrifying battle scream. The bag Jagdarags didn't wait to be bitten a second time, but fled helter-skelter over the mountains from which they had come, whilst Polynesia and her victorious army followed watchfully behind like a great, threatening, black cloud. The doctor picked up his high hat which had been knocked off in the fight, dusted it carefully and put it on. "Tomorrow," he said, shaking his fist towards the hills, "we will arrange the terms of peace, and we will arrange them in the city of Bag Jagdarag." His words were greeted with cheers of triumph from the admiring Popsipetels. The war was over.